In 344 BC, a 12-year-old boy stood in the dirt of a Macedonian arena. A massive wild stallion was thrashing in the ring. It had already thrown 3 seasoned trainers to the ground, and the king was ready to send the animal back as a lost cause. But the boy noticed something everyone else missed. The horse kept flinching at the ground. It was terrified of its own shadow. He stepped forward, grabbed the reins, and turned the animal's face directly into the sun. The shadow vanished behind it, and the beast went perfectly still. The boy mounted the horse and rode it flawlessly. Watching from the edge of the ring, his father, King Philip, openly wept. He told his son that the kingdom of Macedon was simply too small to contain him. 2 years later, the greatest mind in Greece was hired to tutor the young prince. Aristotle arrived to teach geometry, medicine, and politics. But Alexander became obsessed with copying out the Iliad in his own hand. He started sleeping with that scroll tucked under his pillow, captivated by the mythic figure of Achilles. Achilles famously faced a stark decision: live a long, peaceful life in absolute obscurity, or die young in a blaze of eternal glory. By the time Alexander was a teenager, he had already decided exactly which path he was going to take. Alexander had stopped viewing himself as a mortal prince. He began operating as a mythological figure, convinced that the rules of human endurance and safety simply no longer applied to him. At age 16, his father rode north for a siege, leaving the teenager in charge of the kingdom. A northern tribe saw the empty throne and revolted. Alexander didn't hesitate or ask for advice. He marched immediately, crushed the rebellion in a matter of weeks, and built a brand new city on the smoldering ground, naming it after himself. 2 years later, he commanded the cavalry wing while his father held the right. Alexander charged directly into the sacred band of Thebes, an elite unit of 300 paired warriors that hadn't been broken in 40 years. He slaughtered every last one of them in formation. His father embraced him on the battlefield, but the trust was gone. The king realized he had created a rival entirely too competent to control. By the time Alexander was 20, his father was assassinated, bleeding out on the marble from a bodyguard's dagger. Before the body even cooled, Alexander claimed the crown. He then stayed awake for an entire week, systematically executing cousins, half-brothers, and any rival general with a drop of royal blood. When a southern Greek city heard a rumor that the new king was dead, they slaughtered his local garrison. In response, Alexander force-marched his army 300 miles in just 14 days. The city's gates were still celebrating when his forces appeared on the horizon. A week later, Thebes was burned to ashes. 6,000 people lay dead, and 30,000 survivors were dragged away in chains. He spared exactly one house. Everything else was leveled. The remaining Greek cities sent ambassadors within the month, and none ever revolted against him again. He secured his home base through absolute terror, freeing him to turn his attention toward the rest of the world. Alexander crossed the sea into Asia with 35,000 men behind him. Standing at the prow of the lead ship, he hurled a spear over the water, letting it thud into the shoreline. He leapt into the surf, declaring that the entire continent belonged to him by first blood. His strategy relied entirely on relentless velocity. At the Granicus River, he didn't arrange his forces. He charged straight across the water into the waiting Persian cavalry. A Persian blade missed his skull by the width of a finger, and he was only saved when his officer, Cletus, stepped in to cut the attacker down. He approached every obstacle with this exact same blunt force. Arriving in a dusty Anatolian town, locals presented him with the legendary Gordian knot, a tangled rope prophesied to grant the rule of Asia to whoever could unravel it. Alexander didn't even bother looking for the loose end of the rope. He simply drew his sword and sliced it in half. Later, when he finally faced the Persian king of kings, Darius, and his massive army, Alexander ignored the bulk of the enemy forces. He launched a hyper-focused charge straight at the royal chariot. Darius sees his face coming through the guards, panics, and runs away, completely abandoning his own mother, wife, and daughters in his tent. He was dismantling the largest empire on earth by ignoring the established customs of war. By the time the Persian generals could coordinate a defense, Alexander's cavalry was already behind them, making their superior numbers count for nothing.
When the island city of Tyre refused his terms, trusting their massive walls and the half-mile of open ocean to protect them, Alexander instead decided to walk to them. His engineers tore down mainland forests and farmhouses, building a road of stone and timber straight through the Mediterranean Sea until the walls fell. After that, Egypt simply opened its gates without a fight. He marched directly across the burning sands to a desert oasis, where local priests declared him the Son of God. He walked out into the sun, founded Alexandria on the coast, and began physically redrawing the map to bear his own name. By October 331 BC, Alexander met Darius for the final time on the plains of Gaugamela. This time, the Persian king brought his ultimate force: scythed chariots, war elephants, and an army so large the horizon disappeared behind them. This map shows the battle's tactical geometry. Alexander rode his cavalry diagonally away from the center. Darius stretched his lines to mirror the movement. The overstretched Persian formation lost cohesion and snapped open a gap. Alexander instantly drove a wedge straight through the hole, and once again, Darius panicked and ran. By the age of 25, Alexander held every throne from Greece to India. His tactical brilliance and terrifying speed left him entirely without peers on Earth. By the age of 28, the map was nearly full. Without a clear enemy left to focus on, Alexander's temperament began to shift. He started adopting the customs of the kings he had just defeated and viewing his own inner circle with a new, volatile suspicion. During a drunken banquet in Samarkand, a general mocked Alexander's Persian clothing and claimed his father was the better king. Alexander reached for a spear. Guards tried to hold his arms, but he tears free and throws the weapon, killing the man before his cup hits the floor. It was Clitus, the very man who saved his life at the Granicus River 6 years prior. The realization shattered him. He locked himself in his chambers for 3 days. He refused to eat, weeping and begging his own guards to execute him for what he had done. Alexander's relentless drive was a weapon he didn't know how to holster. Now that he had conquered the map, that same aggression was burning through his own humanity and turning his most loyal followers into targets. He pushed onward into the brutal monsoons of India. The environment was vicious. He fought armies equipped with hundreds of war elephants, and in the deep mud of the Punjab, his childhood horse, the black stallion Bucephalus, finally collapsed and died. Alexander wanted to keep marching, past the edge of the known maps. But his soldiers, men who had marched for 8 grueling years and forgotten the faces of their own children, finally hit their limit. They sat down in the rain. They refused his orders. For the first time in his life, Alexander was forced to turn back. By June 323 BC, he was 32 years old, resting in Babylon. Grief-stricken by the recent death of his closest childhood friend, his health deteriorated. Following a long banquet, a sudden pain hit his gut. Over 12 days, his mortal body failed, and he succumbed to a fever. As he lay dying, his generals crowded the doorway and asked who should inherit the massive empire. Alexander whispered, "To the strongest." Within 50 years of his last breath, the men in that room would assassinate each other, carving his legacy into bloody, fractured pieces. Alexander traded the quiet comfort of old age to ensure his name would survive history, conquering the world in little more than a decade. But he was ultimately defeated by the one boundary no military genius can outmaneuver: the hard, inescapable limits